Welcome to Saving UX. I'm your host, Jeremy Kriegel. I believe UX is struggling. Look, there are more people doing the work now than ever before, and every company says they're customer focused. So why does it feel so hard? And I don't mean the work. The work can be hard. That's okay. Why does it feel like we need to fight to do the things that will benefit the people we serve and the organizations we work with? I've been in this fight for more than 25 years, and I believe it is worth fighting for. UX, done well and applied to important problems, can help change the world. Every week, I talk to UX veterans about the challenges facing our practice and what we can do to make it better. This week, I'm joined by Susan Rice. Susan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Susan, you've had quite a career. Would you mind giving folks maybe a little bit of about your background, maybe a little bit how you started and some of the experience you've had, just to give some context for our conversation today?
Yeah. So, well, I started a long time ago. Some people have heard this story already, but I was a server after college because I didn't know what to do. And I had a bachelor's in psychology, and that's a whole thing that just ends up being really beneficial. However, I didn't know at the time. Yeah, I needed something new to do with my brain, and somebody just said, like, you should go into that web design thing. You're really creative. Go check that out. And so I looked into it, and I was like, oh, well, I don't know, why not? So, so it was actually really fortunate, and honestly just stumbled upon it. And then web design ultimately kind of transitioned into user experience design. I think there was user interface design in there at one point, but ultimately it's like the precursor to what we have today for UX and design within organizations. So along the way, I worked for a number of different startups, many of which have been acquired by much larger companies at this point. Somewhere along the way, I got my master's at Bentley in human factors and information design. And then eventually, let's see, I made my way to Staples at the end of my Bentley tenure. I wanted to join an established UX team because previously I was either a team of one or a team of, just a couple of people in a startup kind of environment. So I figured at this point, let's try something different and let me learn from other UXers to just build up my confidence that what I was doing, the methodologies I was choosing, the approaches and processes were the most impactful. And so that's why I joined the Staples team, which was really great because it was, you think about Staples being the .com, but there were so many other aspects of the business. So I worked on everything from furniture instructions to, doing research in somebody's home office, basically in their bedroom in the North End, to
And those are small
to doing
bedrooms.
circular design. Those are small bedrooms. Yeah, I realized at one point, by the way, I was like, wait a second, I'm in this gentleman's bedroom by myself in his house. That's interesting. So, but at the time I was like, yeah, this is the research we're doing, which is great. And that was all about understanding small office, home offices. So, a lot of different breadth of experiences and obviously a lot of design work as well. So that was kind of my first foray into management. Decided I didn't like it because I sucked at it. So I was, plucked out of there to join Vistaprint. And that's where I actually had another chance to be able to build teams. And from then on, I've been, building different teams, design organizations within multiple types of companies. And just so you know, I actually like to call them UX organizations, and that's like a debate in itself. So we can have that debate at some point.
When you say you'd like to call what UX organizations, define that for me a little bit.
Well, there's a lot of debate about whether people want, call these design organizations or whether you should call the teams product design or you should call it UX design, like that whole debate.
Yeah.
I have my own opinion.
Well, let's start there. Why do you choose UX organization over the other possible terms that are being used in the industry? And I'll be the first to agree. Like, we use a lot of different things to describe ourselves, and I think it does cause some confusion with people who to wonder, like, well, wait, are you this or that? And we're kind of referring to similar things. So let present your case for UX organizations.
At the end of the day, there is no perfect answer. So I'll start there. However, again, I have my own opinion and biases. And my big thing about calling a team of, a design organization is that it feels a little bit limiting to me. For me, it's really important that if we're going to be designing for customer value and driving to customer outcomes, then we want to be inclusive of having research, right? Not just research that enables designers, but research that better understands the larger, broader opportunities. And so by calling something a design organization, to me, it's actually limiting our research function and and what our research teams can unlock more broadly.
Okay,
Hmm.
cool. I appreciate that. I want to step back and ask the same kind of opening question I typically ask folks, which is for your assessment of the current state of UX as a practice. And if there's anything that is interesting in terms of that you might connect to through your history, how you've seen it change, how you compare where we are now to where we've been in the future, either in terms of maybe ways that you find that things are better, or maybe new challenges we have, or different challenges, or the same challenge we still have, compared to uh, when you started.
Yeah, it's a big question, right? So, I started over 20 years ago. That's right. I was like 12 when I started in the industry. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so yes, I'm dating myself. Um, so yeah, I started over 20 years ago, and I mean, it was so much has changed since then. Because back then, I would say there was it was a little bit more about best practices. Like again, it was much more design oriented, what how the design can look good on an interface. Um, and and that's actually why, once I stumbled upon user-centered design and this whole notion that you could be, doing some early prototypes and testing and getting people's feedback, that's when I was like, oh wait, that makes so much more sense than me just like deciding that something looks good or doesn't look good, or deciding that it follows a quote unquote best practice. So incorporating that notion of really having inputs all along the way from a user perspective, that was like at that point it was evaluative. It was just like, oh, okay, well let's have people react to the design, and even that for me was like mind blown. Yes, and that's why I decided to pursue Bentley's program for human factors, is because I realized that there's a whole other world out there that is so much broader than the colors I'm choosing, or just or even information hierarchy. So so I feel like that's evolved a lot in terms of, again, of how do we identify what the biggest opportunities are, to enable us to be successful in delivering customer value. So that as a field, we've really expanded over that the course of the 20 years. Um, and so that's been great. But at the same time, we're still relatively new as a community in comparison to some of the other um, departments and teams that we're working with, right? Which means that like where we are and how we're, where there might be inconsistencies with nomenclature we are just talking about, right, or labeling, or how we think about, how consistent we are with how we think about design or UX organizations. Like I think that's natural, like just maturation of our field. And then with that is like as we're newer comparatively, again, some of these engineering's been around for how long? I don't even know, but definitely not 20 years, 30 years, right? Way longer than that. So as we're working with other organizations that have this like longer history, of course, there's going to be natural friction. Like just even thinking about Techman's or development, right? It's like you're introducing new people, you're introducing whole new teams, whole new communities of practice. And so you're going to naturally go through that whole process of trying to figure out like, oh, okay, you're forming, you're storming, right? Hopefully you're norming and performing. And I bet you that still applies to an entire field as well. So we're continuing to storm, but it feels like in a lot of places we're actually normalizing in a lot of ways, which is awesome. And a lot of the consumer oriented software seems like it's really helped so much. And I also talk about, the economy. I was just presenting to our org this last couple weeks and talking about the experience economy. The fact that we are living in an experience economy enables, guess what, experienced professionals, right, to have a lot more opportunity to provide value to a business and an organization. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things going on. So, depending on which part you want to pick up, we can talk about it.
So
you know,
maybe let's start with the Tuckman piece. You've
yeah.
led a lot of different teams. And I appreciate that
hmm
you said in the beginning, you're like, you thought you sucked at management. Um, and I always find it fascinating how people kind of learn and grow over the course of their career. We all do it. We all start, either we realize we're bad at it or we only realize we're bad in retrospect. Um, so, but as you've led more and more teams and you've taken them through that process, are there either consistent patterns or things that you've adapted in terms of your approach that help you move the UX to get to performing either faster or more effectively?
So, one thing I'll always start with is the team itself, right? So, the UX organization in which I'm overseeing, that I'm helping build. Um, and so I'll start there and identify like what can we do better as a team? Where can we show up better? How do we have consistency in terms of expectations? What does good design, great design look like? How do we make sure that we're enabling our team members to know kind of where they are today and what their growth path is for longer term. So all of those things that are very extremely team oriented, that will enable us to be better, in terms of what we deliver. So I'm always going to start there. And then at some point though, you have to look up and out, because that's not where the ceiling is. The ceiling isn't within your own team. It's what will enable them to do their best work is actually much more about, now who are they working with? What how effective and healthy are those relationships and those working models and processes and all those kinds of things. So whether that means in a particular squad, pod, scrum team, whatever you want to call that where some of that work happens, but also not even just at that level. You've got to think about, well, what's going on at the leadership level. Who are my partners? I really believe in this notion of the team that you're on is more important than the team that you lead, because that's what's going to enable the team that you lead to be the most effective, is by influencing others across the organization or your peers, and getting more alignment there in terms of how to operate in the most healthy ways, how to create high performing teams. Because your high performing team isn't the UX team; it's the teams that they're working with, right? It's typically that triad. And then how does the triad function? Well, it depends on leadership and where how clear we are with where we're headed, from a vision, strategy, prioritization perspective. So you're always looking to look up and out. And that should be true of any kind of management level, just thinking about that. Um, yeah. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure if
It's
that's
it's
really
great.
where,
There's a couple
yeah,
things I want to jump off of
yeah.
from there. So it sounds like, if I understood correctly, you're using the people on your team to kind of build those relationships, and I'm assuming advocate for UX within the teams they're working for to create that high performing team that's doing the work. Um, yeah, go ahead.
But
Okay.
also, they can only go so far if the next layer doesn't help from a management leadership perspective, right? And then the next layer and the next layer, right? Like, so you can't necessarily create at the team level. You can only go so far. So that's why it's up to managers, to, directors, leaders of UX teams to create their right environment for success and for high performing teams. And that goes beyond UX.
So
That's that goes much beyond
And
UX.
that's exactly the question I wanted to get to is, so what are the things that you look to kind of build from the bottom up through those individual relationships of between UX and the team? And what are the things that you're trying to advocate for in terms of like top down from a leadership level that's going to set the expectations and create the environment for those teams and the UX folks within them to be successful?
Yeah, bottoms up, it's relationships. I mean, actually, no, all any level. It all starts with relationships, building trust in those relationships, helping demonstrate that you in your given role has the ability to offer value within those relationships, and typically like differentiated value, right? So if you're a designer on a in a squad, it's like how do you build up the relationship that demonstrates like your role and what you're offering within this team, within that triad, is beneficial to the outcomes that that triad is really driving towards. So, again, you got to start with a relationship, and then you have to demonstrate, what you're bringing to the table. In terms of at the more leadership level and beyond, it's like when I think about the environment, how are we even speaking the same language in terms of what we're driving towards? Are we talking about outputs? Or are we talking about outcomes? If we're talking about outcomes, how are we demonstrating that is tied to business success? So making all of those connections and setting up that environment so that we're all talking about the same language, which is customer.
So I imagine in your experience that you've worked with some people who've been really open to this, to that new relationship with UX, and they've welcomed you. Obviously, they hired you and your team, and they're excited to bring you in and see what you can do. And then there's the other people who, despite
Yeah.
all that, just seem to put up roadblocks um, for whatever reason. I don't know if there's any stories you can share. Obviously, you can keep the names out of it, but any stories you can share on how how to either effectively build relationships with people who might not want to do that or might be really resistant, or even how
Mhm.
do you decide that it's not going to be feasible and you either need to go in a different direction or maybe even leave the organization if you don't feel like you'd be able to be successful because of that.
Yeah. I mean, one part of our strategy should always be, as UX professionals, show, don't tell. I now at this point, I've come into multiple organizations where they might have had a previous UX leader there, and and as I'm doing kind of like a listening tour with team member, UXers, but also with partners, with leaders, you can hear what's happening there, which was, hey, it's this like I somebody came in, they're like, "Hey, you know what? Design should be here, and this is where we should have a seat at the table, and this is what we're going to be able to do, and you got to trust me that we're going to make that happen." And then it's just like a really ineffective approach that actually is doing a disservice for all of us in UX because it's creating these models where, then the next person who's coming in already has a hill to climb in terms of building those relationships because they have, people are just have like a dirty taste in their mouth with a previous experience. It's like, thank you. That sucks. so, so in any case, like that's why like show don't tell as much as possible really should be part of our plan. Now that takes a little while, so you got to find different ways to be able to show, again, how you're going to be adding value, how you are adding value, that sort of thing. And so, I think a lot of people talk about those small wins. That's partly why they're talking about small wins in the beginning. It's not always possible, so don't like and things some things sound a lot easier than others. Um, but I mean, I would say overall that should be part of the strategy. In terms of like, yeah, working with people who don't, um, that you just have more challenging individuals, we're always going to have that. I mean, I think that's just part of organizational life. corporate life. So it's like, how do you find the people that are supportive? So that whole notion of building coalitions, it should be a like multiple part strategy, like multi-pronged strategy. I love those words. But okay, so you got to figure out like those people that feel like they're blocking. There's got to be something like strategies and tactics to manage that. Part of that should be actually moving away from even focusing on that, which is expanding your horizons and thinking through like who else is within the organization that has a greater aptitude or interest or has sees some kind of value because you can demonstrate that to them and what that brings. So let's say that like you have a CTO that comes from some different experiences. And so, and that's directly in your org. Well, could you actually use your head of customer success or, sales operations or some other teams to help be part of your advocacy? So it's not just you know, um, um, making the case for certain things. It's actually coming from multiple angles. Again, like in any strategy, that's like a really good one. So whether that's about a person or about like a topic, it's like, it's if you're trying to convince anyone on any kind of topic, it's really helpful when they've heard a similar
Concept. Yeah.
approach or similar direction from multiple people, and especially when they're not like all within your org. So what are those relationships that can be really beneficial and hopefully right like mutually beneficial, because what we're trying to do can be really helpful for other teams like customer success, like customer support. Hello, if we can help them scale more effectively and drive down ticket volume, like that's going to enable them to be more successful, and that's in a lot of cases there's UX can have a lot of impact there. So forging those relationships and building those coalitions can be huge.
I think that's a really great point. I think, I've heard a lot of people can feel alone in their struggles to really support, the people that our products serve. And as you're pointing out, there's just a lot of natural allies who want the same thing, and being able to connect with those, yeah, builds that coalition. And again, I also think it's really important how you said it takes a while for new ideas to be adopted, but the more times someone hears the same idea and from different directions, it helps them sink in and be adopted by an organization. So just, yeah, I really appreciate how you express that. Um, you said when we started off talking about UX being relatively new, and some of these challenges are natural for a newer discipline, newer practice. What do you see
Mhm.
as the next step in our evolution? What are we struggling with now, or maybe what's the next milestone, or that would signal that we're moving forward in our practice, or maybe our next level of maturity, if you will?
I'm like thinking hard about that. I mean, because you're seeing more titles, right? You're seeing more VPs, um, slowly seeing more C-suite. So those are good leading indicators. Although some of that comes with some mismatch in terms of actual skills and experiences and stuff. And then there's also the differences between like, there's another thread that's been going on around this topic, whether there's really, really small startup with a VP versus a, very large organization with a VP, whether it's a bank with a VP because they have VPs everywhere, or, a different type of organization where VP is as not as um, prolific. Um, so yeah, I mean, those are interesting indicators that like certainly moving in the right direction. Um, I think what will be really interesting is what happens in terms of B2B software when it comes to UX and enterprise software when it comes to UX, and how much that really changes um, based on, you know, yeah, based on kind of like that whole notion of consumer grade software. I think there are companies where it looks and it feels like we're moving in the right direction when it comes to that. Like the ADPs of the world forever. It was so horrible to interact with ADP. I'm sorry if anyone's working at ADP. But my point about that is, though, clearly a lot of transition and transformation within such a huge organization that has a number of different acquisitions over the course of many years, right? And creating that broader, like more like consumer grade, those consumer grade experiences within ADP, like to have large organizations like that move so significantly is, um, you know, is those are really great signs too. Um, and then I guess what I would hope is that then we, over time, what we'll do as a community is hopefully get to more of that, because again it's a little wonky in terms of experiences, expectations, roles, like how what the expectations are for even like at the highest level for UX or design. And I think some of that will become a little bit more, hopefully more clear and a little bit more consistent over time. It's just interesting, right? So I don't know if that, I'm not sure if I got where you're hoping to go, but there's certainly some good indicators that we are maturing, um, overall. If we're able to make those kind of impacts to something as large as a big enterprise, company that's been around for decades.
Well, so maybe let's talk about titles. So you've had management titles. You're now a VP. Um, how does being a VP of design now, or UX, sorry, how does that change the influence and impact you're able to have, across and down compared to other roles? And so what difference does it make? So why should other companies who don't have a VP or a CXO consider uh, bringing in someone at that level or promoting someone to that level?
Yeah, because remember I was mentioning like the team that you're on is more important than the team that you lead. So what team are you on? So if you're I actually have a lot of I'm doing some work right now trying to really figure out what is equitable even within an R&D organization as you're thinking about levels and titles and what people should do, and what the expectations are, though, with those levels and titles. What I found with just some anecdotal conversations and just what I'm seeing in industry is that, for whatever reason, UX is always like half a step if not a full step off of, um, you know executives and VPs of engineering and product management. Part of that is probably because we are often reporting into product management. So there's already something that then creates like that
Yeah.
dynamic. Um, so I'm just trying to figure out like what should, even within my organization, like being really very tactical, like in my organization, how might I be able to approach this and think through, whether or not that's ultimately fair and if that's how we should be, um, organized across our R&D. And so what's going to help us determine whether that's, the right way to be, doing that, going forward or not. So doing some investigation on that end. But in terms of what it allows me to do in my company, because every org is going to be
Of course.
different, is what is the team that I'm on that I'll have more interaction with, and therefore it'll be easier for me to influence others, when they're your kind of like your peer, versus if you're two steps below or a step below and you're not even in some of these conversations, or you're not getting the access to the information. So the reason why it gets a little bit like it's not super crystal clear is because you could be in a smaller organization. Let's say you're a manager. I don't, it doesn't even matter what that title is. But if you're, and you're the most senior UXer, let's say, but if your manager brings you into those conversations or does an awesome job with connecting you and with the strategy, or communicates, and cascades down effectively, then maybe that's like okay, maybe that works. But um but typically I would say more often than not that's just not how it works. Not because that manager might not, might not want to do that. Often they just don't know how. They often don't know how to bring in UX. They often don't know what UX will really be able to unlock. So then they don't know what information is going to be, you know, worthwhile for you or helpful to you. And so then it's on the UXer to help manage up and help try to create that relationship where there's the recognition that, yeah, this is the type of information that's going to be valuable to me. Yeah, absolutely. I want to understand what's happening within the business. So how can I get access to that? How can I understand what's happening in the strategy? Because that's actually going to help me with the UX strategy, because those are absolutely should be tied together. So it's really like, where are you in those conversations, and are you or are you not getting access to the information that's going to enable you to, lead the team to success? So that might look different in different organizations.
So you mentioned access to the business and strategy, and I imagine I- if I were to kind of think about maybe different conversations, those might fall into what I would consider conversations I probably knew were happening and maybe I was or wasn't involved in, but I knew they were going on. Are there any types of conversations that maybe you didn't even know were occurring when you were at maybe a lower level position in the organization, and now that you see those happening, um, you're like, oh, I should have been involved in this. I didn't even know what was going on, so that other UX folks could look for and try to become a part of. If you want to hear how Susan Rice, VP of User Experience at Workiva, answers that question and many more, you'll have to tune into the next episode. If you're not already a subscriber, be sure to subscribe so you get notified when new episodes are live. You can also follow me on Twitter at Sonarc, SONARC, or on LinkedIn. I post show updates on both platforms. If you like this conversation and you're waiting for the rest of it to drop, go back and listen to some of the older recordings. You can find them all at sux.live. That's SUX for savingux.live. Until next time, I'm Jeremy Kriegel, and this has been Saving UX.